All right, well, good afternoon. Did you guys get enough food? What was for lunch today? Anything good? Any good like pigeon or guinea fowl or no?
No lobster.
No lobster? No, okay. Welcome to Application Analytics. Add the right features to your app. My name is Brian Randell. I'm a partner with MCW Technologies. We're a small consultancy out of the United States. We do a lot of work for Microsoft as well as focus on Microsoft tools and technologies. I'm an MVP in Visual Studio ALM, which basically means I spend too much time with Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server as well as Visual Studio Online. As a member of Pluralsight's technical staff, I'm working on a course on Visual Studio Online, and if I ever get it done, my editor will die of shock. And last but not least, I co-authored Professional Application Lifecycle Management with Visual Studio 2013 with some friends this year. And if you go to the link, you can get it from amazon.co.uk. And I've been saying the same joke, but yeah, if you buy it, I might get 25 pence. But hey, it's a good doorstop also. So, email address, Twitter handle, blog address in case you have questions afterwards. So we're
I
going
have
to
a
talk
question,
about,
excuse me. Are you going to do any programming on a screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank
Well, I'm not programming. I'm just going to show demos and stuff.
you. Okay, thank you.
So we're going to talk first about application analytics in general, very briefly, and then we'll look at two different solutions that are available that are optimized for the Windows developer space, but also cover cross-platform. So when we think about application analytics, right, it's a type of a business application software if you think about it. At the end of the day, it's about gathering data and being able to analyze that data. The key is that this data often comes from a very technical aspect, and then it's coming from our application's behavior on top of a system. So it contains system information, not necessarily business metrics. And the whole idea is that we want to be able to measure this data so that we can adapt and change our applications to respond more effectively both to environmental issues such as system failures, network unavailability, hard drive failures, disk space issues, etc., as well as to have the right form and function that satisfies our customers' needs, the people who use our software. And so when we think about it, application analytics integrates application usage data, app-centric analytics software, and heuristics integrated into development and operations. And that's probably the key thing. Properly done analytics are something for both development and operations, to the point that in modern teams who are thinking about DevOps, analytics is a core component that drives your team, it drives your practices. So, why do you want them? Well, you want to know if your application is available, right? And if you think about an application today, I put it in quotes because an application for many of us today is multiple things, right? The days of an isolated desktop app are long gone. Interesting applications are connected to something, right? As we went through the evolution of software, we started building software on monolithic mainframes, and we got things like mini computers. And the PC era that brought the power to the people, so to speak, but we still were fairly disconnected. In the early 80s, we started having bulletin board systems and people dialing in with modems. And then we hit this point where for years, there used to be magazines, and most of you have a few gray hairs, but some of you look fairly young. And that these magazines are paper, you buy them at newsstands, and they talk about computers, which is crazy when you think about we have the internet. But in the day, I remember there was a magazine called LAN Magazine. It was all about networking, right? They talked about Novell Network and all these things, right? That was a big thing to have PCs talking. And then, of course, in the 90s, this crazy thing like the internet just totally exploded. Today, our number one technology device is usually a mobile phone. And what I always ask people, how interesting is your mobile when it's disconnected from internet, when it's in airplane mode, so to speak, right? Maybe you can play a few games, but anything interesting that brings you data and provides you with current information requires connectivity to some kind of backend service. Location data is a combination of GPS data and accessing things like Google Maps services, for example, or Apple or Bing, whatever floats your boat platform-wise. I could pull up my Windows phone, but that would just be rude. fundamentally, an application then is often multiple pieces of software working in concert together, and thus there's different things that affect their experience and their availability for users. So we think about just the common example of a phone talking to something in the cloud. There's typically some kind of service, some web service. Now, it might be REST-based, and with all the cool kids, it can be an older, Microsoft ASMX, WCF, or any other type of service out there. Hell, you can be using sockets. The point is, you have a device trying to connect out to some endpoint. That endpoint's availability affects the availability of this app for the user, to the quality of service, the way it can function. And so we definitely need to know when things are not available, and more importantly, why, so we can prevent that from happening. We also want to know if our application is performing. Is it meeting its SLA? Right? SLAs often can be formal, or it can be, this thing's just slow, right? And nothing worse than my wife will be yelling at me. She'll go, "I've got 5 bars. Why is it not working?" Right? She has some basic understanding of what should happen, right? If she doesn't have connectivity, she at least knows, okay, that's the root problem. But once she has connectivity, why is it not working, right? But SLAs are even more complicated to the point of availability. For example, going back to my poor wife, it's usually my fault, mind you, but because it always is. But she'll go to work with an online banking site, and we have children, and so for a lot of you with children, you know that sometimes it's late at night when you get things done. And so she'll often go and try and do some online banking thing at 10, 11 o'clock at night, our time. We're on Pacific time. And what happens is, for some reason, a lot of banks and things decide to do service windows at that time. By then it's 2 o'clock Eastern. And they think, well, no one's going to be doing banking at this hour. Oh, but my wife is. And my general advice response is usually I hear cursing coming out from her little cubby hole because the stupid site's not available, right? And so we need to know if it's performing. Are we meeting an SLA, and are users happy? And then finally, we're thinking about, is your application succeeding? This is much more subtle. The first two often can be gathered through existing mechanisms for data collection and logging that we have, as well as simple ping tests, right, for a service. Is it there or not, right? That's all we care about. SLAs get a little more subtle because of things like how long does it take to make a service call, right? And that might call a call to the service, which calls a database. But then down here we get to the, is it doing what our users want? Are users happy from the standpoint they're getting the features they need? And are we providing the services that who we think our customers are? For example, being from the States, obviously we have a large demographic market by just sheer population and size of our country. A lot of software comes out of the US, but we're not the largest market by far, right? China is the largest worldwide market for services and technology. The question is, are you providing your services with what they need? So for example, someone's coming from China, they might prefer to see your site in Chinese, okay? Europe, you guys have faced this for years, the need to localize across multiple languages to provide a great consumer experience, right? Heck, I've even seen it on parts inside the UK where you see things localized into older languages like Welsh and Gaelic, right? Now, I don't see this often on terminals that someone's using, but fundamentally there's this notion of how much can you customize to give that great user experience. But there's something subtly important here about giving this telemetry. It's that by having this data about our users and how they function and what they use, we can make better decisions about where to invest in. For example, if you realize that 50% of your customers are coming from China, you might want to do things to get more of them to come and for them to shop more and to buy more, to use your services more, right? It's having that insight of what's going on that's critical to going through your backlog and grooming it for what features next. And this is even more critical when you don't have direct access to your customers, which when you do consumer-facing applications, you often don't. Or because of legal rules, and EU has some nice privacy regulations, rules about how you can even interact with them without getting them to opt in. And so when you're facing an environment where you can't, I don't want to say surreptitiously, but you can't just gather data by watching them, you have to tell them, and then you have to also have them opt in. The amount of data you might get is limited, so you're trying to often get at least behavioral patterns. You might not be able to associate it with Bob, Tim, or Abby, but you can associate it with the users that came from this IP block that generally we believe was from this country or from this region of the country, right? Because we're not looking for the subtle, outliers that are willing to use VPN software to bypass it or go through a Tor network or something like that. What we're trying to do is do an analysis of our active users and find out what they want. This is what analytics is all about. So we have passive telemetry where we can gather data because of the environmental conditions of the system. And then we have active telemetry where we customize our code base to provide markers and ticks and flags and notifications to our telemetry gathering systems, our analytics systems, about what's going on. So, what are you going to buy? Well, there's lots of things out there that you can buy. I'm going to show preemptive analytics. I have a short demo as well as I'll show you a bunch of screenshots. Microsoft has decided to get in the game. They have a pre-release product called Microsoft Application Insights. I'm going to try and show you part of it, and I have some walkthroughs. Microsoft has been, how should I say this? Microsoft has been actively listening to customer feedback in their preview release. In addition, they've been evolving their online services platform, and in doing so, that means they've reset some of their tooling to where right now is probably one of the worst times to demo it, and I'll explain why. But I can really show you what they've been doing and where they're going with this. Other ones that I'm just going to mention, but I'm not going to show, New Relic. New Relic has made its name in the web space monitoring. They've got some really nice stuff. Datadog's another one. Splunk. Splunk is well known in the IT pro field as a way to analyze large amounts of unstructured data. It's really amazing how you just point data and let Splunk hook up into it and search it. A common usage pattern for Splunk is to come in and in the morning just search for the string error in your data that's collected. Because you can go through millions upon millions of log files of information quickly and see those. So that's actually a popular mechanism. Beyond that, though, Splunk has a bunch of analytics and tools you can put on type dashboards and things where you can get more feature-rich analysis. Currently, their model is that they charge by the amount of data you monitor. I think it's per gigabyte or something like that. But they're actively looking at how they can be a bigger player in this space. Xamarin, and actually I should have put pre-release next to it also, just announced last week. So Xamarin is a company in the US that makes software to help you write applications for iOS, Android, and as well as OS X. But they help you do that in C#. And so you can work on your Mac. For example, I can come over here and fire up Xamarin Studio. And this IDE allows me to create mobile applications, and I have a solution you're going to see later right here. So if I open this up, and what you'll see is that I'm going to end up with an editing environment that lets me edit and write C#. This is for an Android app. But what's great about that, they also have a plugin for Visual Studio, which means I can get that same solution in Visual Studio. Excuse me? No, it's not free. They have a low-cost edition, and then they have a business and enterprise license. And then as you can see here, they have a special tool that hooks up to iOS to build iOS applications because the way Apple makes their rules, you have to run this on OS X. But the point is they make this set of tools that are optimized around mobile applications, and they have a new analytics product that is optimized around that. So if you look at these different products, they're not all the same. In fact, it's not easy to say that you would only need one versus the other. On this list here, Preemptive, for example, probably has one of the broadest reaches as far as the stacks they support for custom telemetry. Okay, once again, remember, some of these things will give you analytics through monitoring the environment. For example, Microsoft Insights has a feature they call Global System Monitoring, which at the end of the day doesn't require you to do any code. You just point it at an endpoint. It'll do basically, HTTP 200 checking. Are you okay? You can then add what's called a web test, which will have it go perform a set of HTTP request and response combinations. And based upon the success or failure of that, you can do something richer. Neither of those require you change your application code. Okay? New Relic does a lot of the same thing. Datadog has those features. Whereas Xamarin Analytics is optimized more upon you adding some telemetry to your application. And some of it's just by referencing an assembly and putting in just a single piece of code, and they'll do a bunch of stuff through monitoring how your app runs. Same thing with some of these things. Microsoft has a plugin for Visual Studio that, depending upon your type of app, will automatically do some basic instrumentation. Now, it does modify your code a little, but you don't have to really think deeply. All of these, at some point, though, have places where you can think more deeply about the telemetry to really build the shape of your analytics data warehouse. So in either case, these are available, and of course, nothing stops you from rolling your own. Although I discourage you from that. Microsoft, for a company that has deep pockets and lots of smart people, they still haven't shipped their first version of their product. So that tells you something, that it's not necessarily as easy as it looks. But hey, you guys are all smart, maybe you can do it faster. So let's take a look first at Application Insights. Now, I will warn you again that this is preview. Now, Application Insights is a part of Microsoft's larger ALM family. Now, traditionally, Microsoft has offered on-premises solutions. In the late 2000s, around 2009, they really started laying out their vision for a cloud-based platform. When they released Azure, I think that was actually a 2008 PDC. But in either case, they really started thinking about, hey, we have customers that will want a nice on-premise solution, but we also know there's customers ready to go to the cloud. So they've brought Team Foundation Server to the cloud under the banner of Visual Studio Online. Now, I did a talk about this earlier, so you can watch the recording if you didn't come to the talk. But I talked about this in detail, and I'm not going to here other than to point out that there's this thing, Application Insights, that is a part of the larger Visual Studio Online family. So in order to use Application Insights, you have to define yourself a Visual Studio Online account. Now, this is where we're having some evolution. When they first built Visual Studio Online, it was its own set of services. Now, behind the scenes, it took advantage of Azure itself, but you didn't access it via the Azure portal. What's changing is Microsoft is building a new Azure portal and a new set of services. That new portal is going to integrate their existing Azure services, as well as it's going to bring Visual Studio Online, including Application Insights, into this new portal. Now here's the fun part. The portal's not done. So to get to Application Insights, some of it's in the old portal, or the current production portal, and some of it's in the new one. In addition, they've been kind of working on their APIs and stuff. So like I said, right now, I wouldn't go and waste a lot of time. I say don't waste a lot of time. If you're going to look at Application Insights, you need to look at it that it's in active development, and that what you do today might not be useful in 6 months because they are making changes. We're going to want to wait for Microsoft to say, hey, this is our new updated pre-release, go forth and use it. The key thing right now is they don't have an SLA, and they're telling you, go ahead and use it in production if you want, but understand it's not production ready. We're not providing SLAs and guarantees. Okay? They may be wondering if it's not that far along, why would I mention it? Well, a couple reasons. I thought it was further along when I did this abstract for this talk, which was back in May. And second, if you're in the Windows space, it's kind of hard to ignore Microsoft, right? They are the 800-pound gorilla. And they're going to make this attractive in a number of ways, both feature set and pricing. Particularly if you have an MSDN subscription, you get a lot of value of Visual Studio Online for free. So as an MSDN subscriber, you might find this. Now that said, if you're coming from, say, an OS 10 environment with no Windows technology and stuff, then this probably wouldn't necessarily be exactly for you. They would work with some of your stuff, websites and web servers, but it's not as broad reaching. Now, related to Visual Studio Online, you can try it for free for 5 users, and you get 60 minutes of build a month. Otherwise, they have different plans. You get free access with MSDN. If you need to buy additional licenses, there's pricing up there, and it's fairly cheap on a per month basis. When we think about what you get a lot of good stuff, and it's worth considering if you don't have a good ALM set of tools or you're looking to move to new tools, particularly if you're a small, medium business where running your own TFS server properly with backups and recovery and doing all the admins can be quite expensive. Online has a lot to offer, and you get a lot of good stuff for free or with your basic and professional subscriptions. If you happen to have a bigger version of Visual Studio, such as Visual Studio Premium, Ultimate, or Team Test Professional, you get access to a lot more features. And you can also buy these advanced features. This is useful, for example, if you have testers that don't use Microsoft's test tools, but want to use the web-based test case management. So something to consider. Which brings me, though, to the shared services, and this is what's interesting is, this slide was given to me by Microsoft, so that's why it's worth showing in that these two items over here, the green and the blue, are available. So cloud build and cloud load testing are something you share across an account. They give you a certain amount of free minutes a month, and then you pay for additional minutes. So you get 60 minutes of build, you get 15,000 virtual user minutes. But then you'll notice the purple box, Application Insights. Well, once again, when this was first built, they announced the preview back in November of 2013. Well, fast forward, we're almost a year in, and like I said, things have changed. They basically have turned the ship and said, we're going to take the feedback we've got from our pre-release testers and users, as well as we've got this vision of this new Azure portal, and so those things have slowed them down. So they may have thought that by now they would have a pricing plan. So we don't know what it is, but it looks like they're planning on it to be some account-based licensing. And my guess is, just like with these two, once again, keyword, Brian is guessing here, but you'll get some baseline services for free as part of your account, and then if you use a lot of it, you pay more. And you can look at things like New Relic and some of the other services to see how those pricing models work, right? Number of servers monitored, Splunk's model, amount of data collected that you can search through. There's lots of different ways that they might price it, okay? So what's it going to do for you? Well, Application Insights is going to help you collect all sorts of telemetry data, both just generic runtime data, how's my application performing, did it crash, exception information, to more specific pieces of data that you specify through custom telemetry. This data then goes up to the Application Insights services, and then you use the various dashboards to drill in and get information. The key thing to understand about Application Insights is it is a cloud-based product only. That means anything that's being monitored has to either be reachable from the cloud. In other words, if you have web servers running on premises and you want to monitor them, Application Insight has to be able to reach them from the internet. Or if you have applications such as a mobile application that you've added custom telemetry to, it needs to be able to reach the App Insight services to phone home, so to speak, and upload log information and things like that. All right, so you have to understand definitely what type of application you build, what your data collection policies are going to be, and will they be accessible. If you're not accessible to those situations, App Insights may not be the right solution for you. But let's talk about what it does do. So first of all, customer usage monitoring. How are users using the system? What's going on? Global system monitoring. Microsoft currently has 16 points of presence around the globe that you can use to check your server and services availability. Okay, and like I said, these can be very simple ping checks or richer web tests. Application performance monitoring. This is two things. APM in the Microsoft space means two things. Is the application performing from an SLA perspective? Is it performing from a performance perspective? But another type of APM is my application not crashing? And there's sometimes when an application crashes and the user doesn't know, right? In the old days, in the 90s, if you did VB, you did on there, resume next. Right? In C# or Java, you might do try catches where the catch block doesn't do anything, right? We'll just pretend that didn't happen. Nobody's going to notice, right? With APM, particularly when it's monitoring managed code, they can grab that data and give you rich diagnostic dumps that you can then analyze. Actual data with log mining. So this is, for example, that Splunk category. We're going to gather all this data and help you drill through it and analyze it and find the interesting bits of information. And finally, it has an alerting system so that you get notified when something interesting. You can specify things that you want to get email notifications or other alerts for. So we're going to go through and look and try and find performance problems, monitor availability, get that usage data, and then use dashboards to gather those insights. Now, out of the box, these are the types of applications Microsoft's providing support for. Websites can be really written in anything. It's just a matter of testing the endpoints. If you get a little further into them and you want to do custom telemetry, it needs to be JavaScript, or if it actually is, if you want to get at the code level, they're supporting managed code right now, so C#, VB.NET, things like that. They're supporting Windows Store apps as well as Windows Phone 8 and technically 8.x apps. what about your type here? Well, this is the problem right now with application insights. Is in preview, they've limited their scope. They don't have formal commitments for these type of devices, so iOS or Android. They've also not provided formal commitments to Windows desktop applications or even Windows services. I'll be honest, and I'm on record now saying this, I've said this many times to them, I'm a little frustrated by that because I think that's ignoring a significant market base. That said, I'm hopeful in that as they've taken time because of some of their changes, that maybe what we're going to see in the next update is maybe they've rethought their SDKs. I don't know. If you care about this and you start playing with application insights, use the feedback mechanism to tell Microsoft, hey, I like this, I don't like this, and maybe I want this. In talking to people, I do find a large base likes that they support it. Websites are obviously number one, right? That's, websites and web services are a given. But we start thinking about apps, right? It's kind of hard to ignore Apple, right? If you're really thinking about mobile. It's really hard to ignore Android. I mean, between the two, you've got huge, premium brand, and you've got huge just worldwide usage, right? I know it's quite popular in lots of parts of Europe. I know I've got guys in Germany who do tons of Android work. And so to ignore those, and the market share that Windows Phone has is teeny tiny comparatively. So if you're going to really be a serious player, you might want to consider that. And then the fact that, well, they have a few billion Windows machines, and there's still lots of desktop apps. So once again, Brian's opinion on that. So things we get, first of all, it works at my desk, but doesn't work for the rest of the world. This one's actually interesting, and we're going to see if it'll show up, but I set up monitoring of, I have a website that I have it for historical reasons, and it's just nothing interesting. It's just a web server running at my house so that I can get to things. And it's hooked up to an old DSL line. And I keep praying that it's going to get upgraded to fiber, but they've been taking their time, so I'm torn. But occasionally it was going down, so I thought I'd monitor it. And so I could see my availability. I also have it monitoring my company's, MCW's website. And it's interesting to see how it might be okay from one location, but when you add extra delays, say coming across from Japan, I'll actually see lack of availability. So we can monitor from different points of presence to see if things are okay. And what you'll get is these dashboards, and you'll be able to see these charts of time it takes to respond to that particular test and where it's responding from. And you can see these different points of presence we have here, Amsterdam, Paris, San Antonio, London, Japan, Miami, etc. So you can have all these different points of presence checking your site. And once again, there's two levels. I can check a just simple ping test, are you okay? As well as I can run what's called a web test, which goes through and exercises and calls different endpoints and checks the responses. And so you can simulate, for example, searching your site. You can simulate a shopping cart experience and see how your application is performing. And you can have this information over time. You can look at exceptions, load, etc. Now, another thing is going back to that idea that if I have good information, I can use that to groom my backlog. I don't have to do a motion-based feature delivery. I can do fact-based delivery. This is particularly critical in organizations where it's proxies for your customer that are making the decisions. I know what our customers want, or I think this is what we should do, right? And so if you have empirical evidence, it's a lot easier to make decisions based upon that. So for example, here's information where we can gather where people are coming from, in this case, from states in the United States. And we start looking at this chart. You guys don't have to know anything about the states, but can you tell me where you'd want to put some investment if you're trying to make customers happy? Well, I've got 36% of my customers coming from California, right? I might want to do things, for example, maybe move my service window, to do my wife's example, from 10 p.m. Pacific to 1 a.m. Pacific, right? Because you have a huge percentage of your customer base there. This is data you can only get if you've got, these are decisions you can make only if you've got the telemetry and the data to understand it. Another thing that you have to do is figure out what's causing the problem, right? And so being able to get those runtime logs from different types of applications aggregated to a central location really helps, right? I mean, almost all of our applications have some form of logging, but sometimes it's impossible to get that data. So having a system that automatically collects and puts it in a central location that's easily accessible through things like a web browser is a big win. And hopefully you can use it to see if something bad is happening before it happens. This goes back to those exceptions that are occurring behind the scenes, right? Is my application showing problems that just haven't made their way up to the user experience to where they don't know it? Maybe it manifests itself by slower performance, right? Maybe it manifests itself in the user gets a weird behavior and they get used to it, right? I mean, it's funny to watch users sometimes work themselves away around a bug because they know not to click there first, they know to go there, and they just kind of live with it. And so what we can do is we can get these alerts that tell us, hey, we noticed that your application has thrown 5 exceptions in the last hour. That's not normal. That's above the threshold you've set. Go take a look at it. And it's happening in this data center. So the whole point of the preview is to allow you to create, configure, and test your applications and try it out. You can go download or do it actually now from within Visual Studio and get the VisX, which basically provides you with extra tools to add the telemetry. So it's a combination of things that will be clear. You need a Visual Studio Online account, and then now you need this Azure account. So let's take a look at a couple things. I'm going to show you some stuff live, and then I'm going to walk you through some screen captures to kind of show you how it's designed to work. So we'll see which version of App Insights is going to show up today.
Cloud services with App Insights?
Excuse me?
They monitor cloud services?
Yes. So if the services endpoints, you can monitor them. They have an SDK for working with certain types of code, but they don't have a specific SDK for Azure Cloud Services right now. In addition, like with Azure websites, you can't just use Azure websites out of the box with them. You can monitor the endpoints, but you can't put custom telemetry right away. There's not a built-in SDK support. So once again, that's where they're evolving things. When I say cloud service, I assume you meant Azure. Is that correct? Yeah. All right, so let me log in. And then I'm going to, once you go here on your home page, you'll see Try App Insights. And when you do that, okay, well, so far this is good. Earlier it was showing no data. So you'll notice that my up rate is 98.8% and 98.6%. So if we go to this website, oh, this is awesome. We're going to get data today. Great. Now, earlier this morning, and so once again, the main group is working on Redmond, so it's possible they're just doing maintenance. I was not getting any data. So we can actually see that I've had some trouble where my site's been down. And we can see the different areas. So in trying to access it from Europe in the last 24 hours, I've had a 94.08% up rate. Okay? And I can come in here and drill down and look at what happened. And here what I'm doing is I'm doing these basic web access requests. So what happens is when you want to monitor something, you come over here and say, new single URL test or new multi-step. If you do single URL, you just provide the endpoint. Okay, you give it a name, where you want to connect, and where you want to monitor, what status code you're looking for, and also you can do basic content matches in the HTTP response. Okay? And these are known as what are called synthetic monitors, right? Because it's not a human doing it. If you do the more complicated multi-step, it says choose a file. The file is what's known in Visual Studio as a web performance test. So if you come over to Visual Studio, there is a specific test type. Let's see if I can add one. So let me show you that. We go under. Let's see if I can. All right, it's filtering them out, but there's basically what's called a web performance test. And the reason they call it that is you generally use it in conjunction with load testing to do things. But it basically is just simply a set of steps that are played back as a form of HTTP request and response pairs. And you come over and you upload that file and specify it will basically run it and check the status. If it fails, then it fails the whole thing. So that's how you implement your more complex shopping cart items. And so you can go over here, this is my last 24 hours. I can go over here and say show me the last 7 days. And if I go really fun, we can say, let's take a look at the last, let's look at summer. So we'll go all the way back to this summer in North America, June 1st to today. Okay, so part of we see a data drop off, so that's interesting. That's probably an issue with the service. But you see, my availability has been all over the place, right? And I can come in here and drill down. So we can see I was down, it looks like, at one point for a couple of days. Okay. And so this is fun when I go and yell at my provider and say, hey, give me money back, you weren't available, right? And so this is just one of the easy built-in things that doesn't require any custom programming, no real work on your part, and you get this nice availability, and you get this set of global points of presence to look at things. And if I go to my MCW one, we can see that it's had some issues, but it's been up better. And then some of these also is not so much that the site was down, it's just the site didn't respond fast enough from that point of presence. I've set a certain threshold about how fast I want the response to be. And so that's a combination of where they're calling from, but also my server, right? My server's not running on multiple huge servers on big pipes, so if it just doesn't respond quick enough, you're going to see that. So that's an example of just the synthetic information. And notice that I got to this by going to the Visual Studio Online portal. In contrast, if you go to the new portal.azure.com and log in, let's see if it'll behave and recognize that account. Come on. What you're going to see here is the new Azure portal. And for contrast, I'll open up the current portal. So manage.windowsazure.com is the current production portal. This is where you manage your production Azure services. That said, Azure is constantly adding new features and services, so it's possible to find that what you want won't be in this portal, because if the services preview, it's possible you'll find it in the new portal. And the new portal, it's very attractively designed. They're trying out some new user experience stuff. I'm still not sold. The jury's still out for me as to whether I like it or not. As a preview, it's got some issues, particularly with managing lots of things. But one of the things you'll see right here is you get a service status for the major Azure data centers. So here's the Northern California, here's San Antonio, here's up in the Chicago data center, here's the East Virginia, here's Brazil, there's the Dublin data center, the Amsterdam data center, we got Japan, and we got a few others out there that Microsoft has available worldwide. So you get their overall Azure availability, and then you can come in here and browse different services. For example, I can go see my virtual machines. I can look at my Visual Studio Online team projects. And going further, you'll see that there is application insights. When you come over here, it'll show you what's being monitored. Now, these aren't mine. These are someone I work with. And right now, these aren't configured to collect any data, but you'll see that you can come in here, and when you do, it gives you a quick start. It shows you how you can add insights to your application. Turn it on for monitoring, add code to monitor web pages, hook into your application, and you'll see you can also install an agent on your server, and then you'll be able to monitor things like service response time, etc. And you can go over here and look at your different instances, and then drill down into the data based upon what you have. So this is where we're kind of in a weird flux, is that I've got data over here, but I can also get data over here as they move to the new user experience. And so that's what you probably need to be aware of most. Now, if we go back to the overview, really quick, we're going to see if some of the other data is available. If it is, I'll show you it here in the real portal. Otherwise, I'm going to go to my demo mates. But let's take a look at my Fabricam extranet. And let's go change the date range. Let's go back to custom. And when I originally put this in, it was back in March. I had a demo all built up. Now this is one of those UI things that drives me nuts. I know how to type a date. Please let me type the date. But no, I have to use the little calendar control. So we'll go back to March 9th. And that's why it's preview, so I can shout at them. Okay. So now if we go through here and we look at my applications, let's switch to the date, that's fun. We can come see what I'm monitoring. So I've got a server that's available. I then come over here to my alerts, and we have to go back and change that date. Go to custom. Hopefully it'll remember. There we go. All right, so this one did find my alerts. Let's see. This one. Yeah, all right, so someone decided not to show up. Let's go and see the usage, because usage will often show us the top pages a user's used. I need to change the application. Let's go to the prod, and then we'll go back to usage, and go to users. Okay, well, it's decided it's not going to show me, so that's why we'll go to the demo aids. At one point I had some of this working. They've changed it so it's not all behaving. So what we'll do here is show you how this for a fictitious company, how it could work. So we'll come over here to my, whoops, here. All right, so this is going to walk us through some steps, and let's see if we can get there. All right. So imagine you have Fabricam Fiber, a fictitious cable company, and they have a system for monitoring service tickets. And so a user can come in, look at a ticket, and they can get self-help information. They can also come in and use the internet site for employees. So they can come in here, log in, they can go look at their service tickets. They can then look at service ticket details, and then go in here and assign them to a technician, delete, etc. They can go in and create a new one. Right? Typical type of corporate website where you do things related to your business. Okay? You've got probably a custom website or maybe mobile applications that you're using. So in this case, we're going through and we're going to fill in a ticket information, and we'll go through and create it. And you come over and delete it. Let's center that a little more. All right, and go look at the customer directory. So basically, what you see here is exercising the application. Different things are happening. Now, watching the way the user goes through that can then be seen and monitored through this dashboard. So one of the things about application insights, and what you're going to see is the dashboard is going to look like that new one I showed you at the end. But you're going to be able to come in and define custom dashboards of information you care about. Things like availability metrics, things like reliability. And you can come in and set up different dashboards for different applications as well as different versions of the applications. So for example, we have the extranet site for both production and test, and we can monitor them both with the same set of tools. This allows us to also see the impact of new code changes to the app in our test environment versus production. So we can go through and look at reliability, performance, and go through and look at our different dashboards. Now, then we can look at different events. For example, as we change code, we can see that there's a memory event here that we can look at later. Whoops, let's come back here, sorry. Now, look at the internet, we might want to remove availability. So you can come in and customize different parts of the event and alerts you care about. So it really lets you create a customized user experience based upon what you care about. In this case, we get rid of availability. And now you have a site that looks the way you want. Okay, come over here and change the text, the size. And the thing to do is not get focused on exactly the way this looks. Just understand that their intent is that you'll have this customization available in the portal to make dashboards have that heads-up display that you want to use, the order that you want them, etc. All right, it's almost done. Let's. All right, here we're going to save our changes, and now we've got our new dashboard. And of course, it's easy to create a new dashboard, give it a name. You can specify optionally different types of templates. So this is going to monitor the custom site. And you'll see they have a blank one or an application instrumented one where they know to look for certain standard telemetry if you use the VIS6 in your application code. And then you can come in here and pick different types of metrics you want to add. So this is pretty obvious. We'll just kind of jump along here. So you go through, set up the options. You can change the color, the subtitle, if you want to inherit from a particular dashboard. So you see we made a blue tile, percentage, make it bigger, go forward and do other types of synthetic adapters. So for example, here's the availability of the landing page. So you saw that when I showed you my real websites, we can come over and add those as a tile, change the name, and now you have that on your home page also. And so you can continue to do this, lots of great metrics. Request rate, page times. Here's our exception rate relative to exception, request rate to exceptions. So you have 100 exceptions of those, or 100 requests, and of those requests, 20 had exceptions. You can see that on a chart, what you're going to see here. So we come over here, finish this up, and now you see this exception rate to request rate, drag it down there. So you see a nice chart about how you're doing it. With the red line being exception rate, we're not having any exceptions, which is what we want. So now you can go over to applications. You can see the applications that are being instrumented. You can see some standard KPIs for response time, as well as if you have multiple servers, you'd see it across those servers. If you go to your servers tab, you'll get a list of all the servers that are being monitored. And the way you can do that is there's basic monitoring, as well as you can install the Microsoft monitoring agent inside there. This allows you to get richer telemetry data, as well as if you're using it, you can get IntelliTrace data from your managed code. This is showing you how an alert can come in, how you can get the details. And if it's hooked in with the agent, you can actually get the source data. Here's an example of some of the synthetic monitors, showing you monitoring a website. I showed you that earlier, like with my website. And so we'll jump along through here. Site outage, site restored. You can use multiple monitors. As I mentioned, simple ping ones, as well as richer operational tests. Red values indicate the failures, and so you can look at those in more detail. And lots of different points of presence. And we'll go forward that. And lots of good detail there. Almost there. Look at spikes. Look at the good. Look at the get service. So you can look here that a standard set of requests worked, but then there was a failure on this one. This one returned an internal server error. So this is an example of running the synthetic test that does multiple steps. And now you can say, open up that internal error. If you have Visual Studio Ultimate, this will give you an IntelliTrace log. This is the web request log, not the IntelliTrace log. And this will show you what the error was and let you drill down and even see the data that was passed that caused the error. So that's giving you that extra insight into the data. So the summary level, as well as the ability to drill down into it. This is just more points of presence.
You get to see the stack tricks on that as well.
Not for that one. That one was just showing you a failed web test. I'm going to show you the IntelliTrace one in just a second, which would show you the call stack. All right, so here we start looking at server and application performance. And here's we start looking at how the application is responding, how it's performing both from a speed perspective, things like CPU usage, we see network, memory usage, but also things like exception rates. Here we see SQL Server and other dependencies, statistics related to that, number of calls, time for calls. We can see that there was significant SQL Server activity up there. We can drill down and see response time. We see these different spikes, and these are all points that you can then drill into based upon what you're monitoring. So there's your response time distribution. Most requests are pretty fast. In other words, they're under 50 milliseconds. You look at your exception rate over time, and there you see that there was a spike in exceptions at that time as well as here. If you look at your CPU percentage, once again, there's a spike around process CPU usage. And so you really can start looking at different individual events and then correlating them across what was going on at those points in time in your application. Same thing here as memory use. Right, we see that there was memory use average instances, we only have one server being monitored. If you had more than one, of course, you would see that. And then here you see your top 10 requests by issue count, so you can take a look at the various calls being monitored. So here we're going to look at the exception rates. So we're going to drill down into this. So we click on there. And then we go over to the diagnostics section. And then there's that spike that we've got. And we see that there's some correlated performance events, as well as we have 25 exception events. If we come into the exceptions, we can come over and filter by the different types. You can group by the number, as well as you can come in here and specify the different types, so exception, performance, or memory. And if we come over to grouping, we can say by problem, request, exception, failed function. So come over and filter, we see we have a null reference exception. We said it's in our ASP.NET page view. We can open this up, and this will give us some detailed logging information. And then if we have IntelliTrace, you'll see there's this option up here to download the IntelliTrace file. But we do get call stack information in line inside the browser. And this is coming from having the agent installed on the server that's running the ASP.NET application. And so we see there's the exception to get customer summary in the employee review model.cs file. And we see that the customer object was null. So that's some rich information that we can see right in the web browser for this particular application being monitored.
Typically what you'd see in an event viewer on an IIS server is the same sort of stack trace you get in an event viewer on IIS.
I don't think you're going to get this kind of detail in the standard event viewer. If you dumped an exception, you'd get just the exception trace. But the thing you're going to get here is if you have IntelliTrace, you can open up the IntelliTrace file, and when properly configured, you can open up the IntelliTrace file and select debug, and this will launch the historical debugger, which will find the source code and take you right to it and let you see where that error occurred in context inside the application. And that's probably one of the more compelling features. Now, the downside for people, of course, is it requires Ultimate, but you only need one copy of Ultimate to take advantage of it. And that's where you really start seeing the value of having this application insights monitoring technology that's monitoring your Microsoft stack correlated into a central location to be able to bring that information down. So you can have a lead developer, advanced developer go through and look at that and really get to the bottom of the problem sooner. And you can go forward and then you can do additional metrics and various things. I'm not going to go into too much more, but basically you get the idea that Microsoft is really set out to build a very rich platform to help you monitor both availability and how your application is being used. And here we're drilling into the memory metric. We take a look at the memory event. We can drill down to that tile. And this will go to the diagnostic events also. We can open up, you can see memory usage reached 50%. We can drill down, we can see that there's this .NET CLR memory. We can go look at the performance counters and see what they were showing from the machine. And this is just automatically collected telemetry from having the agent installed. And here we can download the memory snapshot. This will up the diagnostic screen inside Visual Studio. We can see what process that was occurring in. We can see what was loaded in memory. And we can even compare it to a baseline snapshot to know what we think we should be having versus what we're seeing here. We see that the customer size has increased, not alarming, but we can look at the customer objects is gotten really huge, almost 500 million. So you come down and drill down into this. We can start seeing that we're having large instances, basically over 256 megabytes. 256 kilobytes. So those are on the large object heap, which is basically a managed version of a memory link, right, where you're having objects that can't be easily garbage collected. And so, once again, they're really looking at how can they give you a lot of stuff for free, short of going and customizing your application code. You can then go in and go to the point of adding calls in C# or JavaScript inside your application that then post additional metrics back to the system. So these are relative sections about who's been using it, different features that are being used, different pages. You can update the chart. Look at different page views. You can also track different deployments. They know that when you've updated the code base, so you can track that as a point in time. that here's one update, here's another update. You can see your performance over time to see how an update affects your application's availability and performance. Here we're drilling down into individual activities, hourly trends. Then we have a spike in users. What are they doing? Individual application events can be logged. Here we have requested service tickets. So remember, this is a service ticket application, so we are actually able to add application-specific domain data into our collection process and correlate that data down to something that translates to the business use, not just the core functional use of the code. And so we go through and see the different operations. So you see edit, create, and delete operations are individually tracked as units of work in our system. Okay, and we got more sessions, lots of good stuff here. Here we're seeing how long it takes per page. And then finally, this is where I showed you a little bit how you can look at individual unique users, how many users per day, daily users. If you drill down further, you'll be able to get information like what type of operating system they're using. Here you see their new versus returning users down here in the corner. All right, so here we have some new users, the blue. These are all returning users, and then some more. We have more sessions, but they're not very active. And we go through there. You can pin to your dashboard, of course. You can look at authenticated users versus anonymous users. This helps you start looking at loyal users because you have cookie data to know that they've been to the site or that they've logged in. And so you can see that information, and then you can drill down and look at operating systems used. Here we see Windows Server 2003, different copies of Windows, some OS 10 users, some Windows 7 users. And you notice over here we have a lot of different breakdowns, screen resolutions, the network they're coming in, devices they might be using. Okay, so here we see 1680 by 1050, different browsers that they're using. So once again, another set of data that's available about who's using your application and from what type of environment. Are we providing the application support for those environments that our users are commonly using? It's one thing to tell people what browser they should have. It's another thing for what browser they'll try and access your website with, for example. So those are all things that can be gathered and get insight. As you see, location, language being used. For example, here, the point is we've got an unknown language, 54%. We got Dutch, French, and German being used. So obviously we have a large international audience, so we want to think about localization and customizing the content for those particular types of users. So at the end of the day, right, Application Insights is really trying to be your one-stop hub. Probably the biggest issue I have with it is that they've limited their scope to a specific subset of popular applications. So take a look at it. It is in preview and consider it as a possibility for your applications. Now that said, what if you don't want to go to the cloud, right? One of the big problems with Application Insights, besides its immaturity and that it is a new product and its limited scope, is that you have to accept that Microsoft's going to have all the data hosted up there, and that applications that are being monitored have to be cloud accessible one way or another, right? Either you have to be able to call out, in the case of, say, from an application or device, or in the case of things like GSM and global points of presence, you have to be hanging out on the internet so they can reach you. So if you have things that are in a private network or need more control or you need broader application support, you might need to look to an alternative vendor. So Preemptive Analytics is, Preemptive is the company and Analytics is their product. They are a Microsoft partner, so they work closely with Microsoft to the point that Microsoft has put part of their analytics tools in the on-premises version of TFS. And in fact, Preemptive is Microsoft's go-to partner for analytics if you want an on-premises solution. So right now they view themselves less as competition and more as complementary and having some unique offerings. And yes, there's places where they do offer direct competition. One of the key things though is if you look at the app support, they support all the Microsoft modern things like stores, Windows Phone, but they support also regular .NET applications, C++, JavaScript app. They support iOS and Android. I'll show you in a moment support for Xamarin Android. So they've got very broad platform support. They support even Java. And they support different types of application types, right? They're not focused on just one thing, they're focused on broad reach, whether it be enterprise line of business application, B2B applications, or commercial ISV style applications, if you're doing something like consumer software. And the other thing is they have a very flexible deployment model. You can run everything on premises, you can run a hybrid situation, or you can put stuff up in the cloud in a combination of using their services as well as virtual machines. So the idea is that you're going to have your various types of client application and production servers, and you're going to have preemptive analytics hooked in with TFS as the common usage scenario. And what happens is this allows you to link information coming in from your applications via the analytics hub and be able to translate those where necessary into TFS bugs and work items. They provide a community edition out of the box. So if you install TFS 2012 or 2013, preemptive analytics is in the box. Microsoft worked a deal to where you get basic analytics available for .NET applications. If you want richer support for full platform support, you want custom business rules, and you want to integrate with all types of application code bases, you upgrade to the professional edition. And this allows you then to hook in with the preemptive analytics workbench. So you have the baseline features that are built into TFS through the TFS administration tool, or you can upgrade to the full analytics workbench, which also then allows you access to their analytics data hub. And the analytics data hub then allows you to put an endpoint out there so that all the data can be collected and then viewed through the various dashboards and tools. So you get to use both preemptive tools as well as integrate with TFS. They've got really deep integration that they've got hooked in through the server as well as in Team Explorer. Now this is a 2012 screenshot, but it works the same in 2013. And what you're able to do is look at real-time incident detection from within TFS and then correlate that to your code base and start working on bug fixes. When an incident occurs, it gets translated to a TFS work item, gives you things like stack trace information, an incident work item. And this is very similar to what I showed you with the IntelliTrace data earlier. The difference is with preemptive, they get that broad array support. IntelliTrace is something that's focused on managed applications and is optimized for web server and web services installations. With preemptive, the data can be coming from any of their application sources, and they'll provide that to you in their log format and in their workbench, but also the ability to translate that into a work item that then can be picked up by your dev team. So you see in here, we can have work items data that accept new data, which means that as something happens, it can get updated. So often what happens is an exception occurs for one user, it occurs for multiple users. You don't want a million work items for the same problem, but you do want to know that this user is happening for more people. So it can do updated counter data, and you can look at that overall on the workbench and see it as a trend, but you only have one work item to actually go through and fix. It's easily configurable. You can do custom rules if you do the full version. With the basic version, you get 3 rules type. You get error count over time, severity of count, and top error over time. If you upgrade to the professional version, then you can write all your custom rules and specify how you want things to happen. Once you have the rules and have the workbench set up, you can then use their dashboards, very much like application insights, to go through and take a look at what's going on. And I'm going to give you a demonstration of this in a minute. But here's just some highlights of things you'll see. Overall session activity, new and returning user, session and user count timing, OS usage, right? When you start looking at these things, New Relic's going to have the same things, Datadog's going to have the same things, right? These are common metrics. And so you start getting into the customization where things get to be a little more unique. Runtime usage and timing, all sorts of good stuff. Geolocation. Naturally, you're going to be able to filter down on type, organization, usage. You can also come in and create custom pages and custom charts. And you can add different widgets to provide you with additional information, geolocation lookup, etc. Pages included, exception counts mapped on top of that. Lots of good information, link to URL, search and filter settings. And then you can go in and create different dimensions, slice and dice, and look at it with different charting controls, built-in animations. All this is available in their full product. And so it's one of those things that's really nice to know that you have an option out there that's really rich. And probably why I like Preemptive the most is because they have such a broad platform support, and they've been doing it a while. The downside to, for example, Xamarin, it's brand new. It just came out last week. Okay, you're going to have to adapt it. And as much as I like Microsoft, and I'm an MVP, and I'm a big supporter of Microsoft, what can I do? I can't sell my customers a product that they can't pay for, that they can't get an SLA for. So those are things to consider if you're looking for something today. And like I said, you might want to look at the other products mentioned also. But let me show you an example with my phone. So this is just a sample app that I got from the Preemptive folks. They were kind enough to do the lifting for me. And so what I did is I deployed it on my phone here. And it's right there, so I'm going to just touch it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to end up with the home page that you see here on the screen. Okay? So same stuff here. And you'll see that there's different options. I can do an about. I can capture feedback and preferences. I can measure performance. I can monitor exceptions. And I can show identity information. Now, if I click Show Identity on my phone, it tells me I'm in the sales department. And this will be important when I show you the dashboards. But I'm in sales. You can't see that. But the other thing is if I go back to the home and click tap the Capture Feedback and Performance, I end up with this screen, which is a happiness index. And then I also can pick my favorite color. Now, before I do anything else, let's go out to my web browser. And let's go over here to the workbench. So we're going to load the workbench up. And what we're going to do here is we're going to come over and filter down this date to the last 7 days. And we'll see that it looks like I've been in here. And so today I haven't done anything, so 0. And if we come down here, we'll see a few things, right? We have key statistics, we have feature summaries that may have been used, sessions by OS, and if we go back up here, we can start looking at things like critical activity, customers that have come in, and notice that we have activity by role, okay? So we had one session there. We have exceptions, happiness by day, so we haven't had any happiness yet. And for colors, we've had fuchsia and yellow. So you, sir, the striped shirt. What is your happiness index? So right now it's at 5. What would you like your happiness index to be? 7. Okay, so we're going to go up to 7. Can you verify that I set that to 7? All right. And how about you, sir? We'll pick your favorite color. Now, just for giggles, let's not pick fuchsia or yellow. You can pick aqua, black, blue, fuchsia, gray, green, lime. You go for green, okay? So I'm going to tap OK, and so we'll get green there. And then I'm going to hit Submit. Okay, so thank you for submitting. And what's going to happen here is this is making a post out the cloud, so it's going through this phone system, it's going out to the internet, and it's going to the server. So in theory, if we refresh, notice the sales count went to 2, happiness index went up to 6.96, so 7, and then notice there's green. Real-time analytics for your application that you can monitor in real time if you want. I can even come over here and monitor exceptions. I can do a handled exception, I can do a thrown exception, and I can do an unhandled, which was simulated, and that information will show up over here in exceptions. Okay, we'll do a refresh. This might take a moment, but I can also get the exception data in real time, and this is hooked up to TFS so that I could then go look at the exception data in there. I don't think I remember my password, so we might have to do something about that in a second. Let's see if I can.
Do you mean Visual Studio Online when you say TFS?
No, I do not. This one is actually using TFS. They have not integrated yet with TFS Online. So they have TFS in a VM up in the cloud. Okay, you have to excuse me for a second. We're going to do, and I apologize to the recording. It's going to pop out for a second. 2 seconds while I get my password. You can see my screen? Nice. I'm less worried about you guys. I mean, it's a demo. It wouldn't be horrible. I just don't want it in perpetuity, forever, so to speak, on the internet, on the video. Like I said, it's a demo. We could change it, but who knows what else you might see in my password manager. All right, let's see if login worked. Okay, great. So that worked. Get rid of that. We'll put it back. Okay. And we're back. So let's do a couple things. Let's make this there. So let's go over to the exceptions here. Let's refresh, see if we got some data. Oh, look at that. We have data. There's my unhandled exception, right? Our exception count went up, right, because I did this earlier. And we can see the different exception types and that they happen today. Once again, all real time. Now behind the scenes, we've had this exception. The first exception, the one I pushed the top one of the button, and I'll show you the slides. It's, if you come through here, it looks like, whoops. Whoops, back one. So there's just buttons to cause different ones to occur. So the one that's handled is a divide by zero error. So if we go over here and go over to TFS, we'll see we have the system.divide by zero exception. Now, notice it has the log detail, etc. And then if we come over here and refresh it, what we'll see here is that if we look at our all changes, so it was updated yesterday. So it hasn't come through in today's, but I did this demo yesterday. And what happened was we updated our count for this exception. So right, we're not creating a new one for the same problem. We're saying, hey, someone else had this detailed. And then what they do is they attach their preemptive log information to it. And what they have is they go, well, we've got the same data. Here's the current information that's the same. And you get the stack trace right there in the work item. Naturally, they're looking at how they can integrate with Visual Studio Online. Visual Studio Online, up until middle of May this year, when they announced it at TechEd, the extensibility model was fairly limited for server-to-server integration. That you could use the client libraries, so Preemptive could have put something up in the cloud and then called it like a client, but that doesn't really scale well. Starting in May, Microsoft introduced two things. They introduced, and it's still in preview, a REST-based interface. So this allows Preemptive to have their workbench talk to TFS directly in Visual Studio Online, very much like the way they do it here, but in the online category. And they introduced something called service hooks, which allows TFS to cause events to occur to posting so you can actually get bi-directional stuff. So this is something that Preemptive has to invest in on their side, but they also need Microsoft to finish the service layer. Also, Preemptive is looking at how they can integrate into application insights. Because once again, there's things that obviously they're doing that Microsoft's not going near. They're not going near Java right now. Microsoft has not made no formal commitment to iOS and Android. So you could actually use the combination of the two together, even if you wanted to, particularly if Microsoft provides something free in your Visual Studio Online account. So it's really nice to know that you have these choices. And like I said, what I like about Preemptive is the wide range of support and the fact that they do give you a rich set of choice. While we're here, here's the actual source code for this. This is C# code. And for this application, you'll see a couple of things. First of all, the unhandled exception handler is simply a line of code in the startup code of the application that sets up a global exception handler. In the client factory, we can then handle things like exceptions, and then we call their client and report the exception. That makes the call out, and you just configure the data of where your endpoint is. And then in the case of the feedback, you saw there's our slider, and here I can gather the data, and then we come down a little further, and you'll see it calls the feature tick method, where we specify, hey, feedback was submitted, and this was, in this case, the happiness index, and here was the colors that were picked. And that information just got pushed up through the cloud, went to their, not the data factory, the data hub, and once it was in the data hub, it was immediately available to the dashboard in real time. So you have that real-time availability as well as obviously the analytics over time, that perpetual history that you can use to look at things. And then I just have a couple screenshots of the workbench here for you to look at as reference. But fundamentally, right, Application Insights is about helping you understand your application better and your users better. And by understanding your users better, it helps you define your goals and kind of provide a better guided roadmap. Users will ask for everything, and they'll tell you that they want everything. Microsoft's user voice is littered with that. But one of the things that helps Microsoft make decisions is not just things like, here's what I told you I wanted, here's not what I voted on I wanted, but here's what I'm really using. Right? You know, Microsoft, people wonder, well, Microsoft will cut a feature. It's heartbreaking when it's a feature you use and like. I've had that happen. But then they'll say, well, you know how many users used it? You know, they have what they call SQUIM data, which is when you start Visual Studio, it asks you if they can collect some anonymous telemetry. And by the way, you really should. It really helps them a lot. That data goes in to help both analyze performance problems, but it also lets them see what gets used. You know, Microsoft, as big as they are, doesn't have unlimited resources to give us new features. And so they do look at is, where do people spend their time inside Visual Studio, right? Where does Visual Studio spend its time? Do they need to fix performance things? We've seen that over the years. They keep improving performance. And so it's that analytics data that's going to help you make those better decisions to really satisfy your users. And what's nice about it is you don't have to do it all at once. For example, if you have a web property, just adding uptime availability will really let you focus on things. I didn't know how bad my site really was. It's not important because it's only for me, but really knowing that it was not available at all, but let alone that I was having, you know, around the world problems, and I travel a lot, is interesting to know. To the point is I'm deciding if I'm going to keep the line or not. It's one of those trade-offs, right? I pay for it, but I'm not getting the great service. If they won't do anything about it, why should I pay them? But I don't have evidence to go and say, look, you guys owe me money. You're not living up to your SLA. So you can do the same thing, and then once again, you then add the next level, which is the basic, where you just have to add the toolkit. Like with application analytics, you import the physics, and it just puts a little starter code in there, and you're done. It automatically gives you some base telemetry. And then finally, like I just showed you with the Xamarin application, you can go in there and get very granular about the data that's collected, which is particularly useful on a new feature, right? Did we do it the right way? It's a good way to do things like A/B testing, where you add feature flags, give two users different versions, tag them, and see how they go through it. See what their response time is. Stuff that is really hard to do if you don't have the data. Make your decisions based upon facts, not emotions. So on that note, thank you very much for coming. Hopefully you learned something and at least saw something you can think about. And I've got a few minutes for questions, if you have any.
Could you use SCOM for looking at the monitoring?
So that's an interesting question. So SCOM is Microsoft. The question was, do you use SCOM for any of the monitoring? Yes, I do. In fact, I have a customer that's using it extensively. So SCOM is Microsoft's System Center Operations Manager product. It does a lot of different types of monitoring. It's optimized for on-premises, so monitoring your servers in your data centers. Within SCOM, there's a number of features that you can use from an IT pro perspective to monitor, you know, processor utilization, disk space, operating system patching, things like that. They also have a component called Application Performance Monitoring. Now, this is important because the APM agent has evolved into the Microsoft Monitoring Agent. It's now the same agent used by SCOM in 2012 R2 that's used by Application Insights. And so the agent is configured to either talk to a SCOM environment or to an Application Insights environment. Okay? So if your stuff is all within a private network, you would want to use SCOM plus the agent. If, on the other hand, your servers are internet accessible, you'd want to use the MMA agent and have it point to Application Insights. That's Microsoft's vision, basically, and how that will work. Long-term, it's interesting to see, right? Application Insights is obviously still evolving rapidly, and we're due for a new SCOM update, so we'll have to see. Now, I know Microsoft released a couple weeks ago as part of the Windows 10 preview, they did release a preview of System Center. I have not even had a chance to read what's supposedly in there, so I don't know what they're doing on that point. But that is an interesting area. But SCOM is definitely a great solution today for on-premises solutions, and the APM feature is really useful if you're monitoring ASP.NET websites, ASP.NET web services, WCF services, and one of my customers is using it, and it's proved to be very helpful. It actually helped them find a weird bug that they weren't aware of, and because of the APM data and that stack trace and everything, that rich detail that they were able to get from IntelliTrace, they were able to find out where they were getting a bad piece of data passed in that wasn't being validated, and it just saved them a lot of effort. So it's really been something they're using, and they're looking to use it even more in their next generation. So they actually have an old generation of their product that used WCF services and had a rich client front end. Their new version is all web-based and modern, and they're moving to a bunch of REST-based services. So they're getting usages out with their old services, and they're planning to use it for their new services. Now for them, they're an interesting quagmire in that the original plan was to stay the way it was, which is private network, VPN access. But now they're looking at, well, this cloud thing isn't going away, maybe we should look at that. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But yeah, they're using SCOM today, and I think it's a great solution if you have a combination of the expertise and the willingness to get it set up correctly. The biggest thing with SCOM is that you don't just drop it in a day. It requires some thought, and ignoring things like licensing. It requires some proper setup. And to be honest, getting the APM stuff is interesting. I typically allocate a 3-day consulting gig to get APM configured and running for customers because it is fairly complex, but it's not impossible.
Well, what about alerting? You spoke a lot about monitoring, but what about letting someone know when things go wrong?
In what case? All the things I've showed you have different alerting mechanisms. They all will do email. SCOM does email. TFS does email alerts. Visual Studio Online does email alerts. So I can't speak to all the products. I do know with the Microsoft products, they don't do it out of the box. However, they all support a notification hook in, so TFS and Visual Studio Online, so you could just simply hook into your own service. So for example, Twilio, for example, you could use its setup. But it's just, the problem with some of those things is vendors have shied away from that because of the rapid change. You know, at one point I know some of the SCOM stuff in the older versions had support for pagers. Well, who gets a page anymore, right? And so what they found is they said, look, we'll support 2 things. Email is not going away. Everybody does email. Or we'll provide some kind of hook that you can get notified, and based upon that notification, you can do whatever you want. You can then create a bug in your system or do those type of things. So in the case of TFS, etc., it doesn't have anything beyond email, but it has, custom, it's email or a service hook. And you can then be notified, and then from there do whichever you want. So if I was going to do it, I would just hook it to Twilio is what I would do.
We're actually in the process of,
No? Okay.
We're trying to build a monitoring solution. We've got a decent Azure infrastructure, a couple of cloud services,
Yep.
web services, and queues and storage and all that. So we wanted to have a single pane of glass where we can monitor, besides the thing you just went through, things like the queue depth at any given point, dead letter accounts, and if the storage is running, hitting its capacity, or if my certificate is expiring. And we bumped into all these problems, and then it's been more of a reactive approach. So
Yep.
we have any the end goal is to kind of set up a small service desk, but then this is probably the first step towards doing that. So is there any product which you would recommend?
No, and I can speak from experience. So my company with a partner company actually here in the UK, Engine Limited, who's a consultancy, we have built a new product that we originally built for Microsoft that we are going to take to market next year. In the process of building this, as well as Engine's experience working with lots of different big companies, big and small. In fact, Engine's the largest partner in EMEA for billing for compute and storage. They've done some really big projects. And my point to bring that up is that with a lot of experience, we've had to write custom stuff. A good example is Microsoft today still does not have a public API for getting billing data and pricing data. You can get the pricing data from the website, and they give you CSV files to get billing data. And they're starting to add stuff for EA customers, but they don't have a public one. Well, the problem is we're doing things like for one of the customers that Engine worked with, they spent up hundreds of thousands of compute cores to do some calculations. Well, you can wait till Microsoft gives you the bill, or you can kind of look at it. And when you're thinking about those kind of numbers, you kind of sometimes want to check the accounting. So you want to say, this is what I think we ran. What are they billing us for? And so my point is, in the process, Engine and us, when we've built these products, have built customized metrics and solutions. We've used combination of things. Sometimes like New Relic. We've used Splunk. We've used different sets of data depending upon the customer need, because these are usually customer engagements, to analyze the data, because there is not a holistic solution, because all the things I'm talking about were built on top of Azure, right, to address your key point. So the short answer to the question, currently I don't know of any. Now it doesn't mean there's not out there. I've not sat down in the last month or two and researched and said who's got one. But to this point, I don't know of any off-the-shelf Azure-focused analytics solution that does the things that I know you want. And what we found in our consulting engagements is that we've had to do it ourselves custom, right? So custom IP has been built around these things to get that information. Now, that's what we've done for customers, and then we built this new product, which is basically I can even show you, can I show you? I'd have to get the URL. We'll do that in a second if someone wants to see it, but we built basically a virtual lab environment so you can do pre-sales and classroom training. So it's on top of Azure VMs. So here's things we want to know, right? For example, if I go to create a class, how much is it going to cost me per hour to run that class? That's a new feature we're adding because we want to know that, but there's nothing in Azure, so we're having to do it ourselves. We have to know, data center availability. We have to check, storage times. How fast is it taking to load data? What's our time to load VMs? So there's all this metrics data that is not available out of the box that we're having to write ourselves in custom C# as well as with some PowerShell scripts and things like that. Another big thing, your standard Azure account has limits, right? When you set up an Azure account, even if you give them your credit card, they give you a limited amount of resources because they don't want you to suddenly have this huge bill, right? So if you want more of something, you have to go ask for it. Well, if you're not aware of that, or if your account hits its limit, things just stop working, right? So let's say you need more virtual networks or more storage. So those are also things that there's an API for that, but where's the analytics to show me my usage over time? We'll create a class, and to run a class, you might need, say, 10 VMs at 8 cores each. So that uses 80 cores out of your account. Your standard account only gives you 20 cores, by the way. So we've bumped up our account, so we're now using 80, but if I shut down those classes, those don't go against my core count. So then you have this issue of, well, how do I track that kind of usage, which is, I have this much allocated in my system, but it's not allocated as far as Azure is concerned, right? So what's my buffer point? Yeah, all that stuff is things that we're having to write by hand. So separately, there's probably a market there. That said, that's a market that you have to be kind of bold to get into, considering Microsoft will be doing something around that. It's just a matter if you're willing to wait for them or compete. So since we've been doing custom solutions, we built a solution. I don't know if someone like Preemptive or anybody else is going to want to get into that space on an Azure-specific solution, because A, Microsoft has the edge in that they know everything that's going on, and B, they're working on an analytics platform. So, did that answer your question? Okay. Sure. Anything else? Well, thank you for coming to the show. I appreciate you coming to my session. Reach out to me on the internet if you have any other further questions. But like I said, if I get to do this talk again next year, hopefully it'll be more verbose. One of the big things I want to do is get some, I need to get some customer releases to show you some real customer data for things we've done. But it's a great space to get into now because there's lots of energy around it, there's lots of good tools out there. And it's that next step of maturity to really make you a successful software endeavor, whether you're inside a company or you're a software firm. And I said this in my talk yesterday, every company is a software company. If you're doing anything reasonably modern, if you want to stay in business, you have to have a good IT and software program. And then analytics is a big part of it. So thank you very much. Enjoy the talk. Yes, one more?
Just just wondering, thinking about how companies like Netflix or companies which have massive cloud presence, how do they do it? Which might be outside the Microsoft stack, but they must have run into the same issues.
And a lot of them, particularly when you talk about some of the big players, they are using a lot of custom stuff. What you'll find is that some of them have chosen to publish some of their stuff as open source. So tools they've used and ideas they come up with, but I haven't checked recently, but I know a lot of them they build in-house because they tend to they have these unique problems. The general recommendation I tell people is don't get obsessed about building your solution to be the next Facebook, the next Twitter. Build it as good as you can and use the right tools for the job, and know that in 6 months you might throw it all away because the way you solve a problem today will be totally different when you solve it at a different level of scale. But also, 6 months in our industry gives you a whole new set of tools, options, scale options. Microsoft, for example, just last month released a whole new set of servers that are available that give you better performance, right? So just by switching servers and paying a little more a month, or I mean a little more a minute, you now get 3 to 4 times the performance, for example, on certain situations. Those are things that you can't be omnipotent about. So you have to be very agile. And so when it comes to these tools, sometimes you'll write custom, other times it's easier to buy. It really depends. But you'll find the bigger firms. I know Facebook, for example. They've written their own compilers. They've done some of their own stuff to the extreme. So you got to be careful looking at the big shops, unless you could work for one. I don't know, but the point is, for those really big shops, they tend to have evolved into the world they have, which is a combination of homegrown and some off the shelf. But a lot of them are looking at taking the combination of open source and then adding their own special little bits of pixie dust to it. Thank you. But we're not the largest market by far, right? China is the largest worldwide market for services and technology. The question is, are you providing your services with what they need? So for example, someone's coming from China, they might prefer to see your site in Chinese, okay? Europe, you guys have faced this for years, the need to localize across multiple languages to provide a great consumer experience, right? Heck, I've even seen it on parts inside the UK where you see things localized into older languages like Welsh and Gaelic, right? Now, I don't see this often on terminals that someone's using, but fundamentally there's this notion of how much can you customize to give that great user experience. But there's something subtly important here about getting this telemetry. It's that by having this data about our users, how they function and what they use, we can make better decisions about where to invest in. For example, if you realize that 50% of your customers are coming from China, you might want to do things to get more of them to come and for them to shop more and to buy more, to use your services more, right? It's having that insight of what's going on that's critical to going through your backlog and grooming it for what features next. And this is even more critical when you don't have direct access to your customers, which when you do consumer-facing applications, you often don't. Or because of legal rules, and EU has some nice privacy regulations, rules about how you can even interact with them without getting them to opt in. And so when you're facing an environment where you can't, I don't want to say surreptitiously, but you can't just gather data by watching them, you have to tell them, and then you have to also have them opt in, the amount of data you might get is limited, so you're trying to often get at least behavioral patterns. You might not be able to associate it with Bob, Tim, or Abby, but you can associate it with the users that came from this IP block that generally we believe was from this country, or from this region of the country. Right? Because we're not looking for the subtle, outliers that are. And most of you have a few gray hairs, but some of you look fairly young. And that these magazines are paper. You buy them at newsstands, and they talk about computers, which is crazy when you think about what we have on the internet. But in the day, I remember there was a magazine called LAN Magazine. It was all about networking, right? They talked about Novell Network and all these things, right? That was a big thing to have PCs talking. And then, of course, in the 90s, this crazy thing like the internet just totally exploded. Today, our number one technology device is usually a mobile phone. And what I always ask people, how interesting is your mobile when it's disconnected from internet, when it's in airplane mode, so to speak, right? Maybe you can play a few games, but anything interesting that brings you data and provides you with current information requires connectivity to some kind of backend service. Location data is a combination of GPS data and accessing things like Google Maps services, for example, or Apple or Bing, whatever floats your boat platform-wise. I could pull up my Windows phone, but that would just be rude. Fundamentally, an application then is often multiple pieces of software working in concert together, and thus there's different things that affect their experience and their availability for users. So we think about just the common example of a phone talking to something in the cloud. There's typically some kind of service, some web service. Now, it might be REST-based, and with all the cool kids, it could be an older, Microsoft ASMX, WCF, or any other type of service out there. Hell, you could be using sockets. The point is, you have a device trying to connect out to some endpoint. That endpoint's availability affects the availability of this app for the user, to the quality of service, the way it can function. And so we definitely need to know when things are not available, and more importantly, why, so we can prevent that from happening. We also want to know if our application is performing. Is it meeting its SLA? Right? SLAs often can be formal, that are optimized for the Windows developer space, but also cover cross-platform. So when we think about application analytics, right, it's a type of a business application software if you think about it. At the end of the day, it's about gathering data and being able to analyze that data. The key is that this data often comes from a very technical aspect, and then it's coming from our application's behavior on top of a system. So it contains system information, not necessarily business metrics. And the whole idea is that we want to be able to measure this data so that we can adapt and change our applications to respond more effectively both to environmental issues such as system failures, network unavailability, hard drive failures, disk space issues, etc., as well as to have the right form and function that satisfies our customers' needs, the people who use our software. And so when we think about it, application analytics integrates application usage data, app-centric analytics software, and heuristics integrated into development and operations. And that's probably the key thing. Properly done analytics are something for both development and operations, to the point that in modern teams who are thinking about DevOps, analytics is a core component that drives your team, it drives your practices. So, why do you want them? Well, you want to know if your application is available, right? And if you think about an application day, I put it in quotes because an application for many of us today is multiple things, right? The days of an isolated desktop app are long gone. Interesting applications are connected to something, right? As we went through the evolution of software, we started building software on monolithic mainframes, and we got things like mini computers. And the PC era that brought the power to the people, so to speak, but we still were fairly disconnected. In the early 80s, we started having bulletin board systems and people dial in with modems. And then we hit this point where for years, there used to be magazines. Or it could be, this thing's just slow, right? And nothing worse than my wife will be yelling at me, she'll go, I've got 5 bars, why is it not working, right? She has some basic understanding of what should happen, right? If she doesn't have connectivity, she at least knows, okay, that's the root problem. But once she has connectivity, why is it not working, right? But SLAs are even more complicated to the point of availability. For example, going back to my poor wife, it's usually my fault, mind you, but because it always is. But she'll go to work with an online baking site, and we have children, and so for a lot of you with children, you know that sometimes it's late at night when you get things done. And so she'll often go and try and do some online baking thing at 10, 11 o'clock at night, our time. We're on Pacific time. And what happens is, for some reason, a lot of banks and things decide to do service windows at that time. By then it's 2 o'clock Eastern. And they think, well, no one's going to be doing baking at this hour. Oh, but my wife is. And my general advice response is usually I hear cursing coming out from her little cubby hole because the stupid site's not available, right? And so we need to know if it's performing. Are we meeting an SLA, and are users happy? And then finally, we're thinking about, is your application succeeding? And this is much more subtle. The first two often can be gathered through existing mechanisms for data collection and logging that we have, as well as simple ping tests, right, for a service. Is it there or not, right? That's all we care about. SLAs get a little more subtle because of things like how long does it take to make a service call, right? And that might call a call to the service, which calls a database. But then down here we get to the, is it doing what our users want? Are users happy from the standpoint they're getting the features they need? And are we providing the services that who we think our customers are? For example, being from the States, obviously we have a large demographic market by just sheer population and size of our country. A lot of software comes out of the US. All right, well, good afternoon. Did you guys get enough food? What was for lunch today? Anything good? Any good like pigeon or guinea fowl or no? No lobster? No. Okay. Welcome to Application Analytics. Add the right features to your app. My name is Brian Randell. I'm a partner with MCW Technologies. We're a small consultancy out of the United States. We do a lot of work for Microsoft as well as focus on Microsoft tools and technologies. I'm an MVP in Visual Studio ALM, which basically means I spend too much time with Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server as well as Visual Studio Online. As a member of Pluralsight's technical staff, I'm working on a course on Visual Studio Online, and if I ever get it done, my editor will die of shock. And last but not least, I co-authored Professional Application Lifecycle Management with Visual Studio 2013 with some friends this year. And if you go to the link, you can get it from amazon.co.uk. And I've been saying the same joke, but yeah, if you buy it, I might get 25 pence. But hey, it's a good doorstop also. So, email address, Twitter handle, blog address in case you have questions afterwards. So
I
we're
have
going
a
to talk
question,
about...
excuse me. Are you going to do any programming on a screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
I'm not programming. I'm just going to show demos and stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to talk first about application analytics in general, very briefly, and then we'll look at two different solutions that are available